Good evening. My name is Dale Anderson. I am here at the request of my friend Frank Friedman, who asked that I make a few opening comments. I am not going to introduce our speaker. Frank is going to do that. But I do want to tell you that I have been teaching classes at the University of Minnesota's OLLI program for 8 years or so. And a few years ago, I thought a fellow named Don Samuels would be a great person to invite to come to one of my classes. I didn't know how to get a hold of him. I contacted the Minneapolis school board, and they gave me an email address, and I wrote him a note and asked if he'd be willing to come to one of my classes. He came to my class. My classes last an hour, and or I should say 90 minutes, and it wasn't long before he had the whole class enchanted. And as a result of that, we became friends. And sometime later, about a year or so ago, I had another class, and I asked him if he'd be willing to come to that class and address that class as well. This class was on Zoom, so, you know, it's a little bit clumsy. But he came to that class. The class was much larger, and he enchanted that group as well. So that's, and so when Frank and I met, we had this conversation. I said, you ought to consider this person to come and speak to us. And Frank's eyes lit up, and here we are tonight.
Thanks, Dale. I'd like to welcome you all to the Storytelling Forum. We have a wonderful guest storyteller. I don't know Don that well, but I know of him. I've been reading about his accomplishments over the years and just thought, this guy must have a good story to tell. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Don Samuels.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, all of the guests for coming tonight. And I'm going to share with you a few stories around the issue of embracing difficulties and living with them until the solution comes. I found that all my heroes from childhood became heroes because they had difficulties. And that stuck with me. It occurred to me even as a child. Most of my heroes were biblical heroes, and then I found some comic book heroes, but the thread was still the same. When I became a designer, I found that living with the challenge of a new design problem required some of that kind of courage, maybe on a very small scale. Being willing to sit with a blank page, not knowing what to do. Could another new toy ever be designed? And being willing to sit there, avoid the bathroom breaks, avoid folding clothes, and just sit there with the blank page, start doodling until the ideas came, one after the other after the other. It was a great life lesson for me, and I've learned to live like that. So after I joined the Minneapolis City Council, and you know, cities have big, long-term problems, unsolvable, solutions are unprecedented. I decided to hold vigils every time someone was killed. Now that's walking right into the problem. So I would stand at the place where the person died from morning till night in all kinds of weather in Minnesota and not eat. And I did that for about 8 years and must have stood at the sites of about 100 homicides. Out of that willingness to stand there and to not know what to do came a plethora of solutions. And I'll tell you about two of them. After standing there with usually a crowd of people would come for a while, I decided that the city council wasn't really feeling it. And so decided to put a book there for people to write notes to the city council. Tell them how you feel about this homicide, how it affects you. And people did that. And so after every vigil, the city council got a packet by email of dozens of comments, and I would make a hard copy of the original and send them in a brown manila envelope. And so if there were 20 homicides that year, the city council got 20 packets. So they might not have come to the place of pain, but the place of pain came to them. And it really doesn't matter, I've found, whether you were born in the difficulty, whether or not you voluntarily embraced the difficulty, or whether the difficulty was thrust upon you. If you sit with it for a while, incredible things happen. And so the city council began to notice these tragedies and began to give them the appropriate attention. The mayor came to the vigils. The mayor attended funerals of young people who were killed. And the city council began to turn its face towards the most violent section of the city. Perhaps the strongest example of that is that when the 2008 housing crisis occurred and everything crashed and houses were closed, foreclosed, shut down, damaged, the federal government found that Minneapolis was an exemplary city in responding to the crisis and gave us about $110 million. And in a city council, and you know, there's been a lot of news about city councils lately, where there's a lot of struggle for limited resources between council members and on policy issues, that 100 of that $110 million came to North Minneapolis. And not one question was asked, not one word of protest from my council peers. That's because they had stood with the difficulty of my community and they wanted a solution. I'll tell you a more personal story. At one vigil, a young man who had just been released from prison a few months before was having a difficult time getting work, an African-American young man. His name was John. And he came by the vigil. He said he had heard about it, and he just wanted to be there with me. And he followed me like a shadow. It was quite funny and a little bit strange. But he followed me at maybe 4 feet, 5 feet distance the entire day. We talked about incarceration, the prison system, the criminal justice system. We talked about his inability to find work and losing work after people found out that he had a felony. A few months later, I got a call from him at work, and he had this idea. He said that several cities were considering banning the box. If you know, the box on an application where you have to check whether or not you have a felony. And typically, an employer sees the box checked yes, and they throw that in the garbage bin. And so the Ban the Box program would force employers to exclude that box and not to ask the question about a felony until they were actually ready to make an offer. And then they could objectively decide whether that person qualified for the job. And so I made a resolution to the city council, authored a resolution to ban the box for all city employees or city interviewees. And it passed unanimously. And would you believe that it eventually, the state also passed the ban the box law, and then the state banned it for the entire state of Minnesota. And so now in this entire state of Minnesota, no employer is allowed to ask about a felony until the job is to be offered. And would you believe that John was the first firefighter in the history of Minneapolis hired who had a felony? And he's had a full career as a Minneapolis firefighter. Finally, let me tell you about a more recent situation. I'm now the CEO of microgrants, and microgrants give small grants to low-income people to start a business or a career. You will remember that Philando Castile was killed in 2016. And sometime in 2017, the video of the shooting from the officer's perspective finally came out. It was devastating. And it was a subject of discussion around water coolers, on the phones. The mood, there was a pall on the mood in our city. And we had a board meeting around that time, and one of our board members, on his way to the board meeting, listened to NPR and heard a discussion between the host and two police officers about how tragic it was that low-income people are disproportionately stopped, disproportionately impacted because they drive older cars. And so the light bulb is more likely to go out, and other things are more likely to go wrong, and then they're more likely to get stopped. And Philando had been stopped 49 times in 13 years for various things like a blown headlight. And in fact, the day he was killed, he was stopped on the premise that he had a tail light out. Well, our board member asked the question, is anybody doing anything for people like this? Well, we all sat around and looked at each other, and the question kind of fell in dead air, because was he talking about protesting, or we couldn't understand. And so, no, he said, is anybody helping people like this to fix their cars? Well, we give grants to low-income people to start a business. We're not in the car fixing business. But we were willing to sit with that dilemma and get off the actual agenda of the meeting. And I was a little uncomfortable because my board chair is very much about keeping on track with the agenda. But the entire board conspired that day to break with the agenda and sit with the dilemma. Is anybody doing anything to help people like Philando? To cut a long story short, out of that meeting came an idea to help people to pay for repairs. And so out of that, I created the Lights On program. And today, in 89% of the state of Minnesota, the state troopers, the sheriffs, and the police, and in 10 other states outside of Minnesota, and by the end of the year in 22 other cities outside of our state, the Lights On program now exists. When you get pulled over by a cop for a broken light of any exterior light, instead of a ticket or a lecture, or an impounding, or even a tragedy, you get a voucher to fix the light for free, up to $250 at the nearest participating auto shop. And so now, in the state of Minnesota, since 2017, over 5,000 people have had that positive encounter with a police officer. And it's changing. People are asking for fist bumps, hugs, selfies with the police officer, and writing on Facebook and telling a different kind of story about a relationship with the police. We just were willing to sit there and deal with something that was too difficult to deal with. Standing at a vigil, not being able to solve it, and someone coming along and having an idea, or exposing the city council to the difficulty that they might have been willing to avoid, and them being moved to make changes. I have found that if we are willing to sit with our difficulties with an eye towards a solution, that miracles can happen. And aren't these difficult times? So aren't these times of opportunity? Thank you.
I'm assuming there were times of discouragement. How'd you get through it?
Yeah. By the way, Meg Tuthill is here, and she's one of my peers on the city council, so I'm honored to have Meg here. She's my truth checker. Okay. Yeah, the difficulty. You know, I'll tell you how I encourage somebody else to deal with it. We were on the north side, of course. It's an African-American community, and we were at a vigil. And usually people came, even up to 1,000 people came to a vigil. And a guy came for the first time. He was a white man, white hair, and a little uncomfortable. And he said to me, I don't know what to do. I'm just standing here. I'm not doing anything. What can a white guy do? And I said, you're doing it. And he said, what? And I said, you're being uncomfortable. That is your contribution to this tragedy. And when you experience that, I want you to feel that you are actually doing something, because you're being part of the problem and you're being part of the solution. Just being willing to do that. And so I've taken comfort with the challenges and the difficulties. And if somebody comes at me with not understanding, misinterpreting, I experience that along with my heroes. Every hero that I have has gotten that kind of response. And so I just walk into that class of human beings and feel good about it.
Don, tell me, how does this Lights On program impact the police officers who are providing this service to them, or this opportunity to the people in need?
Yes, the police departments and the police officers and police chiefs all over the country are knocking on our door. We just opened it up to the nation about a year ago, and maybe a little less. And the first place we did it was in Wichita, where the Urban League had heard about it and tried to start one for themselves, and were unable to start it. Well, the police chief heard about it and called us and said, we need this program here. Can you run it out of Minneapolis? And so that's what we did. And so very quickly, he would tell another chief, and another chief would tell another chief, and just by word of mouth. We have not advertised it. And we're now, by the end of the year, will have close to 24 cities, including Tennessee, Chattanooga, Wichita, Jacksonville, and cities like that around the country, and several NFL teams are sponsoring the program in their city. But the cops are just very excited. They write about it. They have written to us about their experience, and then people, when they go to get their car repaired, fill out a survey about how they experienced the event. And they always speak in glowing terms about the police officers, and so that's great feedback for them. We send that information back to the police departments, so we have a loop that is complete and very satisfying. We call it a win-win-win situation. Yes?
Thank you. How is the program funded?
Here again, another great thing about it, people are so excited about the program that we have never had problems funding the program. In the state of Minnesota, we fund everything. And like I said, up to $250, because sometimes you have to take the bumper off, sometimes you have to, it's a module that you have to buy the whole thing, and sometimes it's a wiring problem. And so we pay for the labor for that, and it averages about $68 per change. But people are so excited about it that I can pay $60 or donate $60 and transform a relationship, an encounter that we have seen how tragic these encounters can be, and the ability to transform that is inspiring to donors, and we have raised about $2.5 million so far for that program.
Primarily individual donation.
Yes, primarily individual donations, but outside of Minnesota, the police department pays half, and we pay the other half. And in their half, whenever there's a sports team, we hit them up. And so the Vikings fund Minnesota, the Jaguars fund Jacksonville, the Patriots fund New Bedford, the Spurs are funding San Antonio. Wow. And and so it's kind of a rolling thing. And if you remember the kneeling issue with the NFL, the NFL is very sensitized to how it dealt with that and how its image might have been impacted. So this is a great opportunity for them to heal that also.
Do you think the program has helped the police morale? Because they're hearing positive things and not worried about some horrible negative thing.
Right, yes.
Do you have any?
Yes, and in fact, the chief of Cottage Grove watches the videos of the body cam footage. This is probably the first time when a chief is watching body cam footage to catch happiness, right? And so he watches the body cam footage, and he says, "I wish you guys could see all of them," and so he's trying to get permission from the drivers. He has to track them down, so that we could possibly put them online or on video, but the cops are all just thrilled. They're getting appreciation. Like I said, they're getting fist pumps, selfies, hugs, thank yous, and they themselves are telling their chiefs about the incidents. So we have feedback coming from both the police and the drivers. And in those reports, those surveys that are filled out, we have a 35% return rate, which is very high rate for a survey. But people are so happy. In fact, we give out cars in the microgrants program. We give cars as a form of grant. So if you're getting a grant for a vehicle to carry your tools around or whatever, instead of just giving you a grant to go buy a vehicle, we actually set you up with one of our service providers, and you can actually get the vehicle. And that's the grant. And Bobby and Steve's is the one that does that for us. And Bobby and Steve's owners tell us that people who come in to get their light replaced are way happier than people who come in to get a car. He said, I don't understand it. He said, but people come in to get a light bulb, and the people who come in to get a car cannot compete with them for the sense of gratitude. Yes.
Did you grow up in Minneapolis?
No, I grew up in Jamaica.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I knew that.
Yeah, and I came to America in 1970. So I've been around. I was 20, so I can get the calculator for you. But yes, so I've been here for a long time, and you know, I started very early in this journey. My first step out into adulthood, aside from coming to America as a difficult situation, was when I decided I was going to become part of the civil rights movement in some form or the other. So I decided to join a black church. And if you might look at me and say, well, you're black, so that makes a lot of sense, but I'm Jamaican. And so to walk into a black church, which sings differently, speaks differently, and all of the different cultural nuances, and to be part of that, and to sit there for a long time and learn and be silent, was quite an act of discipline for me. And it transformed my life. And the greatest thing that came out of that is that I met Sandra in our church. It's Pilgrim Baptist Church in St. Paul 30 years ago. So it pays off. I'm telling you, this whole concept pays off. Yes. Oh, you went.
Can I just, thank you so much for talking about the Lights On program.
Yeah.
So I work in law enforcement with one of our neighboring agencies, and we do that. And you are so right. People are absolutely thrilled. And in addition to basically getting this gift, you're not giving them a ticket.
Right.
And so
Right.
they're really excited.
Right.
So it's kind of a win-win for everybody, and you're absolutely right. The officers are thrilled. You know, the folks being stopped are thrilled, and it's just really great.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you one other question, because this has been such a successful program. One of the other things that we do, we apply for grants for car seats. Car seats are another thing that they tend to expire, and people don't know, you know, that, or, you know, I've had this seat for, you know, 10 years, you know, all the kids have been through it, and, you know, or maybe it's been in a crash, and people don't really know enough about that. And we do apply for grants quite often, and I'm going to tell you, those car seats go like crazy. When we stop folks, a lot of times, if the kids aren't restrained, we will try to get them a car seat, you know. And so if I can, you know, just kind of make a plea, I know you all are doing amazing things, but that's another just really great need that's out there.
Well, let me say that it's so great to hear that story coming from you in law enforcement. And as the way I like to put it is, it's not just a good thing that a good thing happens. It's that a good thing happens when a bad thing was supposed to happen. And that's why they're so grateful. But yes, in fact, we are having a summit, a Lights On Summit, in May 12th next year. And it's going to be what's next for Lights On. And a lot of people have had ideas, everything from the transportation department of the Austin is interested in Lights On. A police department has done extensive research on the causes of accidents. And one of the most significant causes is bald tires, because they skid easily off the road. And the average age of a car in accident is 9 years old. So the older cars are having way more accidents than the newer cars. So, you know, well, we can't pay for 4 new tires, you know. But maybe there's a voucher towards tires, right? And if the ticket's too high, or maybe if it's a car seat, it is a seat. So we hadn't thought about the seats before, but at that summit, we're going to put all these things in a basket and come up with the hierarchy of preferences and catch the low-hanging fruit, and we're going to expand this program because as the guy from San Antonio was saying, you know, once you get into the area of real safety, like what causes accidents most, the insurance companies get interested, and all of the manufacturers get more interested because now you're saving them money, you're saving lives, and so on. So we're looking forward to that. We're going to have Chuck Ramsey. I don't know if you know who he is. He's like the 21st century cop of and Chuck Wexler, who is over the Police Executive Research Forum. So we're going to have some notables and looking forward to expansion. Thank you. Yes.
I don't know if this is changing the subject a little or not. You know, you're no longer involved in the city council, but you're still viewed as at least in my opinion, you're still viewed as a big-time leader in your community. How did you stay involved? How did you continue to be involved after you no longer were involved with the city council?
Yeah, you know, I guess we gravitate towards pain. You know, our daughters, one of our daughters came home the other day, and I forgot the syndrome she called it. She was making a critical assessment of her parents' psychological state, and it was something kind of like we were pulled towards, you know, tragedy as a dysfunction, by the way. And anyway, I do think that we care a lot about the city. We've invested a lot of our lives in the city. We live in the most challenged part of the city. So when South Minneapolis gets sneezes, we get pneumonia on the north side. And when homicides go up to 85, 90, 85% of those happen on the north side, or for our African Americans, and 50% happen on the north side. 85% of the shootings, 85% of the homicides, African Americans. And so we have a choice. Do we move away so we can hear no evil, see no evil, or do we say maybe we can be part of the solution? And we live in it, and we have opinions because of 25 years of living in it. So we're able to communicate with a certain level of insight and experience, and so it's irresistible because our lives depend on it. Our neighbors are moving. You know, 4 on our block have moved. 1 has her house on the market. People are taking pills for sedation. A neighbor down the street has a steel plate behind her headboard that faces the street so that she won't get shot while she sleeps. It was installed by her employer, who asked, what can we do? Construction firm. So these are real issues. Bullets are coming into our neighbors' homes and into their cars. And it's really, really hard. And in fact, when I describe it as I'm doing now, people think I'm, you know, making it up or being dramatic, etc. But, you know, a block down the street from us is where Trinity died jumping on her trampoline. You can't exaggerate that. And the people around us have children her age, and they're looking at their kids and thinking, what the heck am I doing here? So when they can, they move. And the tragedy is then we end up with a neighborhood of people who can't move, which then becomes a de facto, more dysfunctional community. People with less resources, people who are, you know, left behind. And a community like that can't sustain. So there are a lot of things tied to that, and we understand that, and so we are enthusiastically, anxiously communicating that something different has to be done. Yes?
Are you finding that those homes that are going up for sale are being purchased by investors and then turned into rental properties?
Well, you know, this is probably the first go-round, because there are several rounds of this, recession, depression, crisis, every time the prices fall and then investors swoop in. And this is probably the first time where they're not being scooped up by investors on a large scale. Certainly larger companies are scooping up some, but the individual guy and the individual neighbor or homeowner who says, hey, that's a house for $50,000. I can put some paint on it and fix it up. That's not happening as much anymore because the prices are so high. Even in spite of the violence, the housing crisis shortage is so strong that the demand is so high that people are, I'm wondering sometimes, did anybody tell them? You know, and we used to see neighbors moving in or looking at a house for sale and run down the block and say, hey, how you doing? We're neighbors. You know, we'll be your friends. Now when we see a neighbor moving in, we go, do they know? You know, yeah, but people are. And very quickly they become disenchanted. So a lot of our neighbors who are moving in now are new to the city, new to the area, can't tell the difference between north, south, east, and west. It's a good price, and then they find out.
What happens when they do find out? Do they move away again then, or do they become a part of a solution then?
Well, both. Our neighbor down the street, for instance, has the family, they have their house on the market after less than a year. And they pay the highest price a house has ever been paid for on our street. Wow, so they're having a little trouble selling that thing. It's a gorgeous house that was brought back and restored by the rehab addict, if you've ever watched, yeah, I know. and so she's a stay-at-home mom, and she just got rabidly, assertively advocating for her children. She's got a toddler and a baby, and it's like we can't live like this. And of course, we celebrated her anxiety in a way, because it's like that is the stuff from which change is made. Now we got somebody who can just turn that focus on the mayor and the city council, on the police chief, and say, we need help. Grab them by the collar and shake them. And so she's done that the whole time. But it wears you down. And so her house is on the market in less than a year. So some people leave quietly. We love the people who leave loudly. Yes.
I think you just opened up, that was going to be my next question. How do you keep from letting the fatigue set in?
From what?
Letting fatigue set in.
Yeah.
You know, because you're in it day after day after day after day.
Mhm.
So what keeps you going, and how do you prevent that fatigue? I mean, obviously you and your wife have, you know, been doing this for quite a while, and and so, I mean, do you keep each other up? Obviously the spiritual, you know.
Yeah, we're really fairly spiritual people,
Yes.
and Sandra is much more spiritual than I am.
Yeah.
In fact, between meditation, prayer, singing, and what else, honey? She's got it all covered, all covered. All the books, all the tapes, all the readings, everything. And I am, you know, I'm good at watching her and absorbing that. So we're very centered around our spirituality. But we also have a neighborhood. The irony of the whole thing is that there is probably no other neighborhood like ours in terms of the interdependence. And we have all of our neighbors are on an email list, a text list, an email list, a Facebook page. And we call, you know, you hear a gunshot and the texts start coming. Did you hear that? How many shots? 4. Did you call? I called. You know, oh, I think it was over south. I think it was, you know, the Amstar gas station. Did anybody see anything? You know, I mean, every time there's a gunshot, there are a dozen or more exchanges. And so, you know, that means that we also get together for things. We celebrate each other, events, birthdays, and we go over to each other's homes. And unfortunately, this is the ugly part of inequity. Unfortunately, our renters move even more frequently because of circumstances. The average renter, I'm told, in North Minneapolis moves every 11 months. And so when you have that kind of turnover in one phase of the community, then that becomes the unstable part of the community, and those neighbors tend not to get close enough to participate in our activities. So they become sort of homeowner activities. And every now and then we have a renter neighbor who will get close enough for that. So our renter neighbors are a little bit more isolated. And, but you know, we made a commitment early on that we would always reach out to all our neighbors. So we reach out to our neighbors across the spectrum. But of course, those who have homes have more invested, you know, and all of that, so. Yes?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say that Ken said, Michael, have him come and preach at church. But no, we, as Ken and his sister, and I share the same sentiment, and that's why I came. He asked me to come tonight. He asked me if I know you. And I just want to thank you for working with the police, doing all the work you do. And I'm so glad I came, because just to hear you talk about the visuals, I totally forgot you were the one that started that. Yeah. You need to say that more. You really do, because people don't know. And I was right there with you back in those days, and I totally forgot that you started that. Mm-hmm. So you should keep that fire. Yeah. You gotta just keep it, no matter what happens, people need to know that. I mean, it just done something for me to hear that, and I'm really just happy to have watched you and to see you today, and you're still doing the same thing, and I'm just excited, man. I'm glad Ken asked me to come, but now we want you to have my job. I don't know about that. But thank you so much, Don, for everything you're doing, and you know.
Well, thank you. You know, between my design career and my city council career, I did attend Luther Seminary and got a Master's of Divinity. So great. I do preach around a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah. So if you want some fire and brimstone, yeah, I'm willing to bring it on. Yeah. Just get in touch, yes.
Can you talk about the lawsuit that you instituted on the police force, the number of police required in the city of Minneapolis?
Yeah. You know, one of the great things about our lives, Sandra and I, is that because of the stands we've taken, because we decided to live where we live and to kind of be public, we get opportunities. And so people might see us showing up in places and think, you know, we have all that initiative. We don't have that much initiative. We have initiative, we don't have that much. People actually come to us and say, would you be willing to join this lawsuit? In the first case, with the lawsuit for the increasing the number of police, one of our neighbors decided to file a lawsuit and actually found a lawyer. And we said, "What, are you doing this by yourself? We'll do it with you." And because she was willing to do it by herself. But we told her it was much more effective if several people did it. And so we got a bunch of us, I think 6 of us on our block. Huh?
8 altogether.
8 altogether, but 6 on our street. We're all, I don't think any of us live more than 3 houses apart from each other. And so, but she doesn't live on our street. And so we all went together, and then because I'm a council member and Sandra's visible, running NAS, and the press comes to us. But it was really Kathy Spann who initiated it. Yeah. Yes.
I like what you say about, keeping connected with your neighbors and, being there for each other. I grew up outside of Detroit, and Detroit didn't do that. And to drive down the streets of Detroit now, so many of them are just abandoned, burned down. And what you're doing, I don't think will let that happen.
Yeah, what really gave us that insight is really what reinforced it for us, is when we learned that we live on Hillside Avenue, where Broadway makes that curve, and before it heads straight east. And that curve is there because, this is what I've heard, because there's a hill that this curve goes around. And when the carts used to come back in the old days, pulling goods into the city to sell, they wouldn't want the ox or the horse to pull it up over the hill, so they'd go around the hill. And so then it became a big path, and then a little lane, and then a road, and then a county road. And so all the streets inside of that conformed to it. So then we had a little tangle town there that breaks the grid of the whole place. But we live on that hill. It used to be called Baptist Hill, because the Swedish Baptist parish, which was centered around the church and the seminary, which are where the school district building is now on West Broadway. I don't know if you know that. But the seminary and church used to be on that location at Girard and Broadway. And Hillside is just a couple blocks away, and it used to be called Baptist Hill because that was the parish, and all of those people on that area went to this church. And so it is just one microcosm of what happened all over the city, where you had a parish, and then the people live around it, right? And so they lived around in different classes. The doctor was there, and the janitor lived there. And so the classes lived together. They served the same God in the same language, and using the same symbols, and the interdependence and mutuality was strong and thick. Now, we still live on Baptist Hill, but we have a white woman from Iowa who was married to a guy from Africa. We have a Somali. We have Eritreans. We have Hmong. We have a Jamaican married to an African American. We have what America wants to be. What we don't have is that we're not connected anymore. And so Baptist Hill is now nobody's hill. It's everybody's hill, but it's not connected. Yeah. When the guy who was born in my house, it was built in 1908, and he was born after they've lived in the house for 12 years, he said that growing up, his brother dated the girl over there, he dated the girl over there, and that's how it was on our street. Now, nobody on our street dates anybody on our street, ever. So if we're going to, and that's happened all over the country as fair housing laws tore down those barriers. You can't say who can't live in your neighborhood anymore. But that created a great transformation of equity. But it also created a lot of challenges because the church, which held people together in community, is now people are driving from hither and yon to commute in, and the people who live here are no longer a community. And so that's why gangs can sprout up, because parents aren't talking. So kids aren't safe, and they're connecting with each other to protect themselves. And so we have all of this dysfunction directly connected to the transformation of society. And what's happened is preachers were not trained in seminary to hold diverse communities together. If you're a Lutheran pastor, you sing Lutheran hymns, and you do it the Lutheran way, and if a black guy comes in the church, it's like, wow. So the pastors were not trained to do that. And in many cases, police officers were not trained to accommodate that. They were trained that black people live them over there. If they come over there too much, you got to stop them or frisk them or ask them what they're doing over here, right? So the whole society was designed around that. And now that we have solved it legally, saying we all can live together, we have not solved it morally or spiritually. And there's no leadership for that. Like I said, the church isn't leading it. And sermons were not preached to accommodate that. They were developed around homogeneity. And the question is, who is going to lead that now? Who's going to lead the true transformation of society that the law was intended to transform, but the law can't? Yes?
Was that the intent of healing our city?
Well, yeah, well, healing our city was just another attempt to say, this is the most violent part of the city. In fact, this is the most violent strip. We're going to stand there in that violent place. And we're going to come together in unity across class and race and just be there and be a presence. And if we're bringing God with us, then God is there. Actually, God has been there, is always there. God's heart is always breaking around the violence God is seeing. But we don't think that way. It's like, oh, God's a God-forsaken place. There's no God-forsaken place. So we just wanted to demonstrate what that looks like. And then maybe something miraculous could grow out of that.
Well,
Well,
if there
thank
are
you.
no more questions, I'd like to thank you for really a great evening.
Thank you.
And wish you the best in all your future endeavors.
Thank you very much. And by the way, let me just give a final shout out to my wife, Sandra. Nobody could do what I've done without a woman like Sandra. And no woman could do what Sandra has done if she didn't have a heart. She created the Northside Achievement Zone, 100 families, 200 kids, African American majority, wraparound services for educational excellence. Kudos to Sandra.